Have weddings lost the plot, or has the plot just thickened? So come with me as a wedding photographer of 12 years to go back in time to 1930 to figure out how did we get from like the standard cake and punch wedding to what we're doing today. So I saw my parents' wedding photos again recently and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks so cute. Go to the church, you invite whoever you want to the church, you have cake and punch at the church. So like super chill, super casual, very inexpensive. Everyone's just there to like celebrate them. How did we get from that being the standard to what we have today within a generation? So come with me back in time to 1930. This is when Brides magazine came out. We were kind of in the throes of World War II, so people were getting married because like their boyfriends, fiancés, whatever, were getting shipped off to war. So big wedding boom, you know, we have the baby boomers, right, that came out of like celebrating that we won the war and all this stuff. So then comes like 1950, Audrey Hepburn gets married in the 50s. So of course Brides magazine is like, oh my gosh, look at this. And then 70s, 80s, and throughout history, during all of these eras of weddings, they're very casual. People are getting married in the church because that was just the culture, and then cake and punch receptions. Now, wealthy people were always having big blowout weddings, hosting these catered dinners and all those kinds of things, but like the average person, the average middle class person was not doing that. So as I'm doing all this research, I'm trying to figure out, okay, when did this shift start to happen? It was sometime in the 80s, but we see this huge shift in the 90s. So in the 80s, Brides magazine reports that, let me get the numbers, the average wedding was about $7,800. And that was if you were going to be hosting 200 people, which is a lot of people, and serving dinner. So that is roughly $26,200 in today's currency. So 2026 wedding money, the average wedding was $26,000. Now, I think what's important is that this was at a church ceremony and then it was just a catered dinner, minimal florals, because again, this is like the average, like middle class to upper middle class wedding. The middle classes and lower were still doing cake and punch weddings at churches. It was 1983. Jump to 1991. The average spend was $16,000, which is $39,000 in 2026 currency. So that is 50% higher of a budget than 8 years prior. That is a huge shift in the market. So why did that happen? Because the economy did not change that much in 8 years. That means that the wedding experience and what we're putting into weddings changed like markedly from 83 to 91 by almost double. We went from the cake and punch weddings of the 80s to now hosting what we would consider the traditional wedding in the 90s became like commonplace. So this is you get married at a church or a wedding venue and then you go to a ballroom or a wedding venue for the reception. And now we're adding ceremony flowers, cocktail hour, a seated dinner or a buffet, dessert, so like the cake cutting, maybe a dessert assortment, and then dancing and any entertainment. That is a huge shift from get married at the church, cake and punch in the church basement, then everyone kind of goes on their way. So why this happened, I think does have a lot to do with like the dot-com boom, the introduction of the internet. Now in the 90s, everybody has access to things they've never seen before. So like we're seeing celebrity weddings, we're seeing these things that are very inspirational. So fast forward now to like the 2020s, we have Pinterest, we have Instagram, we have TikTok. We are seeing the lives of like the rich and famous and the wealthy in ways we never have before. And we're only seeing, well, I wouldn't say that. The algorithms are pushing what is inspirational and aspirational. It's not necessarily showing us what the normal person is doing in a day-to-day, what a normal person is doing for their wedding. We're really only being pushed what people are really like, wow, because that's what gets engagement. So we're seeing very expensive weddings every single day. And it's really hard to differentiate like what's normal, what is luxury. And now there's this push for everything to be luxury. Luxury weddings have somehow become the baseline for what we see today. Partly because within the wedding industry, and I know this as a wedding vendor, pricing transparency is really terrible. It is so hard to know what a wedding costs, what is realistic within a budget. And I'm just going to be really upfront with you guys. I'm a wedding photographer and I do nice weddings. The average wedding budget my couples are coming to me with and booking me as their photographer for are around $100,000, give or take like 20 grand on either side. So I'm doing really beautiful weddings that have a budget for professional vendors to come in and produce this event. And that is not the national average. Most people are trying to stay around like $30,000 or less. And the problem becomes, well, the expectation is this $100,000 wedding. How is anybody supposed to achieve this for less? And I get that. It's very frustrating. But here's the thing. Weddings did not used to be like this. This is a new concept, like within our generation, that everyone needs this like luxury produced event. So if I could give you one piece of like big sister advice, it would be don't spend money on a wedding if you don't have that money to spend on the wedding. And I love the fancy stuff, I really do. I love a reception space dripped in florals. We all do. I love a seated dinner with white glove service. I love steak, filet mignon. Yes, absolutely. But here's the thing. That stuff is so expensive. And before like the 90s, before I was born, like I have seen this change in my lifetime, that was not normal. People that could not afford to have that were not pressured to have that. And people who have the money are always going to spend the money on their events and their celebrations, and that's okay. But I do think we have lost the plot. I do think the plot has thickened to the point that now the average wedding feels so unattainable because it might actually be. And I think we need to just be okay with having these events within our means, whether it's a lot or a little. And as guests and people attending weddings as well, we got to stop putting this pressure on people to say like, well, I better get a steak if I'm going to get you a $100 gift. Like, what happened to just celebrating our friends and being happy for them starting a life with somebody that they love? Anyway, that's my research paper for today. I literally wrote a research paper on my blog about this that has tons of sources and it goes back in time. So feel free to check that out if you want to, but my comments are open for discourse on this. Have we lost the plot? Has the plot thickened to an unrealistic expectation? And what are we going to do? We're already seeing a shift in smaller weddings and smaller budgets being like just as valid and just as celebrated as $100,000 plus weddings. And I think that that's great. I do think that we kind of need to adjust our expectations, especially with our downturning economy. Anyway, what do you think?